हर उस चंदू के लिए जो चैंपियन बनना चाहता है, हर उस चंदू के लिए जो चैंपियन बन सकता है।
This filmmaker that I am joined by today is arguably the finest we have in the industry today. His films have transcended geopolitics and always captured the essence of humankind and human emotions and vulnerabilities. And I would love to call him the humanist filmmaker. And his one latest film has made me weep like a baby, and I've seen it twice already. That is, of course, Chandu Champion. So please, I would like to welcome the legendary, the iconic filmmaker Kabir Khan, sir, on filmeshilmy.com. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure being here.
Right. Look, as I mentioned in my introduction, the film genuinely struck a very uh, huge chord with me, as it has with many. It really talks about the undying spirit of human grit, about aspirations, never giving up on a dream, second innings of life. These are very, very big strands. But when you are making a film which has these very strong emotions, how do you get indulged with that or not as a filmmaker, because it's a very systematic process?
So, for me, I react to a story purely by gut instinct. I mean, this is something that, sometimes we can all sit and analyze and maybe over intellectualize the reasons why we pick up stories. But I honestly feel a filmmaker operates by gut instinct. And if the story sort of really hits you hard in the guts, then you know that, okay, this is a story I really want to, because you need to be really passionate about that story, right? You're going to be on it for a good year or 2 years of your life. So when I heard Murlikant Petkar's story, okay, so I'll be very honest. My first reaction when somebody handed me this old newspaper cutting about his life, my first reaction was, this cannot be true. This is a figment of someone's imagination. And but somehow I couldn't get the story out of my mind, despite the fact that nobody could tell me where he is, where I can find him. There was nothing, no real details coming out. And then after about 2-3 months, I created a team. We sent out researchers, and took us up a couple of months, and we found him. And this was between the two lockdowns, the COVID lockdowns, and I remember just jumping into my car and driving over, for 4 hours to meet him. And it's it was for me, it was, it's just an unbelievable story of the triumph of the human spirit. It's a story of a man who has a dream, and life throws everything it can at him to bring him down, and yet he sort of stands up and goes for his goal again and again and again. So I think, yes, of course, it's very inspirational. Yes, of course, it's very motivational, but it's also just so engaging to see what all he goes through. So, often people talk about, oh, it's a story of a man who achieved this. I said, yes, that can be the story, but more than what he just achieved is the story of how he went on the journey to achieve that. The journey is much more interesting just than what he achieved, which itself is great. But it's just, in one line, a fantastical life of a person who somehow we all forgot.
Hmm. And I think what's always really fascinated me about you is because obviously, you've been I think you've also made documentaries much
Yes,
before you made fictional films. So you've
yes,
always had this eye for real stories and bringing out
yes.
and spotlighting such stories. But I think also, given your experience as a filmmaker and working with such big studios over time, you've managed to fuse that very well with the commercial entertainment side of things.
Yes.
Again, here, when it comes to Chandu Champion, I felt that there was definitely that spotlight, that grit that we needed to see of this man's life. At the same time, you also had your commercial aspects, i.e., having the foot tapping songs. I mean, a stellar soundtrack by Preetham, and Julius's background scores, as always, in your films are great. So again, how do you manage to create this fusion of fictional versus documentary style of storytelling? Because it's not easy to do, and I've seen a lot of people try to do it, but they've unfortunately not been able to manage to get that trick correct.
Again, it's something which is very organic. It's not something that's constructed with a lot of design and thought, because at the end of the day, a filmmaker's signature is something which is a reflection of his or her uh, ideology, aesthetic, sensibility. So the way I express my stories is coming from years of my education, what I've seen, what I've read, what I've enjoyed seeing, because I honestly feel a filmmaker makes the film he or she likes to watch. I definitely make the films I like to watch. Otherwise, I wouldn't make them the way they are, right? I've always been fascinated in the mainstream cinema when a good human story has been set against a real backdrop of a historical or a social or a political context. And that's why I've often said that my favorite filmmaker in my sort of formative years when I was, in college and then studying films, was Mani Ratnam, because I thought nobody did it better than Mani Ratnam.
True.
It would be a huge, big commercial cinema. It was a human story, but there was always a larger than life backdrop. And if there is any one person that I might have tried to emulate consciously or subconsciously, it would be him in India. So whenever I got an opportunity, I would tell myself that if I get an opportunity, I will always try and blend the two, because I do not believe that by putting in a context, it can become, for the lack of a better word, boring. Because that is what I remember when I was entering the industry. A lot of people used to tell me, don't tell anybody you're a documentary filmmaker, because they'll assume that you'll bore them. So when I made my first film, which was in a certain sense autobiographical, to the story of what happened with me and my friend in Afghanistan, the film Kabul Express. It was again a human story with a very strong political backdrop of what's happening in Afghanistan. And I remember Aditya Chopra telling me after that film, he said, I'm apolitical, but as and when I required and needed the information to understand what's happening, you gave it to me in a very palatable form. So he said, if you can do that, I think like what went on to become New York, which is a very political film, which also went on to become very successful. That's how it started. He said, if you can give me the politics of what's happening while you're narrating the human story of these three friends, I think it can work. And that then, he gave me the wings to fly with that. And if there is any USP that I have today, it's like what you mentioned, because it's my documentary background. So what was supposed to be taboo and not mentioned at the beginning of my career, today that is my USP. So I get excited by the story of Chandu Champion. For me is exciting because it's an incredible story of a human being, but set against literally the entire history of India. And that's why I use that line in the end of the film, that Murlikant Petkar ki kahani Azad Hindustan ki kahani hai. Because you see it's so linked to the historical events of our country. It's such a parallel to the struggles that our country went through to fight for a certain space in the world, to fight for a certain recognition, to fight for a certain respect from the world. And Chandu or Murlikant Petkar did exactly that. So these are the kind of stories that resonate with me, and I gravitate towards them, and I try and put them up on screen. And I'm really happy that large parts of the audiences have resonated with it, and they support me while I'm trying to make these films.
Absolutely. No, definitely. I think that love is definitely seemingly there. And you brought a very huge smile to my face when you mentioned Mani Ratnam, because I'm such a huge fan of his films. He is, like you said, if there's anyone who's managed to fuse conflicts or socio political conflicts with human emotions, it is him. And the way he's mastered that art is wonderful. But when I was watching Chandu Champion, and again, I'm not comparing, of course, but it felt for me in many ways, of course, bringing out the story, an unsung story of Murlikant Petkar ji, as well. It seemed like a very beautiful love letter to Forrest Gump and Bhag Milkha Bhag, in many ways. Now, I don't know if this was like an inspirational thing for you or a reference point for you at all, because I'll tell you which scene for me, and I'm not going to spoil it for the viewers because I'm sure there's still many people who still haven't watched it and would like to watch the film. But the climax scene, the ending scene of where he's swimming, that's all I'm gonna say. In that sequence, the way you showcased everything, it was so visually stunning, but yet also it kind of reminded me of the scenes where in Bhag Milkha Bhag, when Farhan Akhtar is running and he can sort of remembers his life. So what would you say was cinematically your reference points and sort of getting that whole sequence together? What went behind the scenes for that?
Again, there's you don't seek out references per se for a particular scene. When you're writing it, you pretty much go with your thought process. But yes, your thought process also constitutes of what you have seen over the years, right? What you have consumed over the years. So it's like I often say that after every film I make, I find myself paying an ode, or maybe in if putting it more in a more vulgar way, copying a shot from Gandhi. Almost every film, because Gandhi is a film that made such a huge impact on me that I see many shots in my films reflecting, the way a certain shot was taken in that film for a certain emotion. So that happens naturally, right? So when you mention films like Forrest Gump or Bhag Mill, these are, successful films that impacted us. And yes, Forrest Gump actually is a great reference, because there have been many times when I've actually described Murlikant Petkar to people as this man is a real life Forrest Gump.
Hmm.
Because of that whole parallel of, like, Forrest Gump was a character, was a fictional character set against these historical landmarks of American history. And Murlikant Petkar happens to be a true life man set against the historical landmarks of Indian history. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess it's inevitable to find a certain sort of a ode or a homage to some of these iconic films. But there's no real like it's not a derivative. It's then your sort of interpretation how you would show those sequences.
And just circling back on my earlier question about you having this very realistic eye on human stories and spotlighting them very well. Uh, I think there is this notion, I think when it comes to the commercial or mainstream cinema, where it's almost in a way, I don't want to use the word glorifying, but it's commercializing poverty. It's kind of just making it seem a lot larger than life than what it is. Whereas I think with you, you've managed to create that balance well. But has there ever been a point in your career where you are showcasing realism and maybe the commercial or mainstream sort of influence was getting a bit overpowering? Has there ever been a sort of situation like that with you?
Um, it has been in one film, where it was a film where I was trying to set a sort of a real context. It was a fictional story, but where there was some commercial pressures, or not commercial pressures, but pressures to sort of cater to a certain segment of the audience where it would come. But it was just on that film. It was a bit of a learning process for me. It all came together well. But I remember at that point saying that, okay, there are certain things that perhaps I expected. Okay, let me see how I would address it. And in addressing some of those things, I feel that sometimes I was not um, purely in my comfort zone, or didn't know how to construct that scene the way I would normally, because normally I'm tight control of my material. I know exactly how I want to shoot a scene before I start it. I know, once I've come there, once I've to come to a location, I know how I'm going to use the material. So it has happened. But I think that's all part of the learning process. After that, I realized that no, you cannot do anything consciously like that. You cannot try and cater to somebody by design, because then you're setting yourself up for failure. The only person you know well, the only person you actually know inherently is you. So
Hmm.
you have to make it for yourself. If you try and say, okay, let me make it for those kind of people, you don't know those kind of people. You'll never be able to achieve that. So it's a process that I've realized that ultimately you have to go with your own convictions. You have to go with your gut feeling, as I mentioned before, and then keep your fingers crossed that a lot more people sort of identify with that. And sometimes they do in huge numbers, sometimes they don't in such large numbers. But
Hmm.
that's you cannot change anything. You cannot inherently see, we're not traders, so we can't say, okay, coffee is not selling, let me sell soya bean,
Ah,
or let me sell avocado. You only know how to do one thing, and you know how to do it the way you do it. You have a certain, that's a signature of a director, right? You know how to tell a story in a certain way. You tell a certain kind of stories that excite you. So you have to keep doing that. Yes, I'm not saying you don't reinvent yourself. You keep up with the times, you keep up with the audiences, but you cannot inherently change your style, because that would be being dishonest to your style, and that would honestly be throwing you into territory that you have no idea about.
sure. And I think also what I really liked about the film as well is that the color schemes that you chose, like for example, when there were scenes in the gown, there were very heavy yellows. There were very heavy
Yes,
yellows you used, and a lot of
warm
browns.
tones.
Yes, and then also then afterwards when he came into the city and it came to his second innings of his life, there was a lot more blues, there was a lot more greens and colors which are a bit more I guess brighter but then also dark at the same time to show that juxtaposition of what he's gone through and yet the hope that he has. Uh Again, when it comes to you choosing the color palette and these technical aspects, I would love to know the process of you going for that, and even that one shot scene of the war sequence as well, the one take scene
Yeah.
as well. If you could please dissect that even more, that would be really great too.
So yeah, I mean, color palette, I think, see, these are things that work at a subliminal level for the audiences, right? It's not like most of the audience is not going to say, oh, there are lots of warm tones here. They're not. They're just going to get a certain feeling because you're using warm tones,
Yeah.
right? So the bulk of the audience is not, but people who are film enthusiasts or people who analyze films like you do obviously would understand that and say, okay, are we trying to make a comment through that? And yes, there's, in his first chapter of his village, there's a certain warmth to the light. There's a lot of use of shades of brown, what I call earth colors. So there's a certain rootedness. He's at the end of the day, son of the soil, and we wanted that. And my brief to Sudeep was that we have to keep it very real, but at the same time a touch of fantasy, because for me his story is a fairy tale. When I heard Murlikant Petkar's story, I know it's true, but I said, my God, this runs like a fairy tale. So that was very important for me, that we keep that little fairy tale feeling throughout the film, which we continued. And then, as you said, the sort of, so as you know, we described the sort of yellowish, orangish tones as warm colors, and we described the blues and greens as the cooler colors, the colder colors, and that goes the certain mood which you also identified. So yes, it is definitely a design that we undertake, and we use these tones and these color palettes. But as I said, for the audience, it's only a mood that they're catching. It's not really something that they're consciously catching. Oh, they're using cool tones now and using warm tones now, and that's the way it should be. These are so at that time when you're watching a film, you should actually not be uh, uh, getting your attention should not be going to that, because your attention should be just stuck in the world that we're creating, and you should just be going with the flow of the character's story.
Now it's interesting. I was speaking about the one take scene that you did,
Yes,
war
the Kashmir
sequence.
one.
And also, it's interesting because you collaborated with Nadiadwala Grandsons, who are the producers of Chandu Champion, before for Phantom.
Yes,
It was obviously like a
yes,
counterterrorism film, a very good film, actually, might I add.
yeah.
Um,
Thank
and
you.
again, I kind of found the color schemes that you had in that film quite similar to the one that you had for this war scene as well. I mean, I don't know. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but what again, when it comes to you creating the war scenes and again and that whole sequence, how much did that footing help you from Phantom to obviously Chandu Champion? Because when you got the production house the same, does that really help as well? Because they understand your vision and what you're trying to portray through the film as well.
Yes, of course it does, but I think every film helps you, because with every film you're learning. At the end of the day, film is a very technical medium. And yes, you might be trained, as I am, from a film school, and I've done my master's in filmmaking. I've trained, but ultimately, your education is when you make your films. So with every film, I feel one becomes better with the craft. One is always learning with the craft. So of course, in Chandu Champion, there are things I learned in Phantom. There are things I learned in Bajrangi Bhaijaan that come into play. There are things I learned in 83 that come into play. These are all elements picked up from these films come into play in telling the story of Chandu Champion. And Sajid, of course, is somebody I've collaborated before, as you know, in Phantom, and I really enjoyed putting that film together. And in Chandu Champion also, he was a solid collaborator. I remember when I heard the story, the first person I came running to was Sajid, and I said, Sajid, I've heard this incredible story, and would you want to collaborate on this? And he immediately said, absolutely, I want to do this. This is such a fascinating story. And he gave such a great canvas to this story, because it needed that canvas. It is a story that needs a large. Sometimes the scale is the story. This little boy from a village who has this absolutely ridiculous dream, and when he reaches that world stage, it needs to look like, oh my God, where has this boy reached? And for that, you need a certain scale. And that's why I say sometimes scale is the story.
Nadiadwala grandsons have had this tendency to really showcase underdog stories and, very extraordinary stories which are very progressive and, where it spotlights an individual who is misunderstood or who's, often kind of suppressed, but then they overcome that. Almost basically a champion of many kinds and conquering the human spirit. They've always had such stories, even if you look at the older works. But one thing that I have to say that I really love about your films is the innocence that you encompass in your films. Um, even if we look at an intense film like New York, there is that sense of naivety that was there. There's a sense of innocence that's there. Even if you look at Nitin Mukesh's character, Bajrangi Bhaijaan is literally all an embodiment of that. 83 is also an embodiment of that. When it comes to you portraying innocence, do you think, Kabir, somewhere within you, there is also that childlike sort of nature in you that is still very much, you're trying to explore and trying to, in a way, fulfill through your films as well?
Absolutely. That goes without saying. I think that, whether it's Neil's naivety towards what's happening over there, or whether it's Bajrangi's innocence, stroke naivety, or even Kapil Dev at times, ridiculously saying all the time, I'm going to win the World Cup, I'm going to win the World Cup against the world's odds, is sometimes you can say stupid stroke naive. And then, of course, Chandu Champion's dream. So, but I think all of these, see, when you have a ridiculous dream, when somebody puts forward a ridiculous dream, and then the journey to actually attain that dream is always such a fascinating human story. So for me also, I think as a person, I've been extremely curious. I've been also ambitious since my childhood. I also had at that point, you can say, for a professor's son in Delhi to say that no, I want to make films in the Hindi film industry without knowing a soul in this city. Landing up here as a documentary filmmaker, when, as I said, documentary was a bad word, and just pushing a story about two journalists getting kidnapped by the Taliban in Afghanistan at a time when those films were just not accepted, or or none of them were being made. Like, later they went on to be called multiplex stories, but here was a time when I was pushing it, there was only one multiplex in the whole of Bombay. So I think for me also, that journey has been like that. I think I've realized that sometimes you have to have ridiculous stories to try and even achieve them. If you don't dream, as they say, you dream for the stars, you reach the treetop. So I think maybe that's why these stories resonate with me. Maybe that's why I get fascinated by these stories, and I feel that I have something in me which will be able to narrate these stories in a way that people will also identify with.
Sure. And I think also the casting choices that you've chosen have always been very fascinating to me because there again the underdog spirit has always been something which has been, not just been instrumental with Nadiadwala grandsons, but with you as well in your films. If we look at even the casting choice of John and John in Kabul Express, I mean it was a very distinct film for him at that point in time. Neil Nitin
Yeah,
Mukesh in New York. Um, there's always been that decision casting choices. Even if we look at Nawaz's role in Bajrangi
yeah.
Bhai, again very unassuming. So when it comes to Kartik, there is this beautiful innocence that he still has. You still feel he is that ambitious young boy from Gwalior. You can feel that vibe, and the way he smiles, the way he cries. There's such a purity in him as an artist. When you have someone like Karthik, and of course even someone like Vijay Raj, who's also as honest and sincere to his craft as ever, when you have honesty in your artists, that must definitely make your work a lot easier, I'm sure, as a director, right? I mean, what was the sort of briefs that you gave them as artists? I mean, I would love to know some very exclusive behind the scene moments if you can also share with us as well.
So, people have often said that, and I now when I look back, I say, hey, yeah, actually my career has been built on doing off casting, right? Who would have thought that John Abram and Katrina Kaif will do a New York at the time when it was done? Where it was just such a such a political film, and it didn't have the usual sort of tropes of song and dance. It had a beautiful album which was all lip sync, but for Katrina it was the first doing a film without a lip sync, without a song and dance. Yet she was fabulous. Even now I'm really happy when people say it was probably one of her finest performances. The same goes for John. At the time of putting Salman in Bajrangi Bhaijaan, everybody said, "Why would you do that? You've just created this monster, action franchise with Salman in the form of Tiger, and now you're putting him into a film that has no action. Like, what is wrong with you?" But it again worked out for us. So I think every time people say, I mean, I remember my initial choice of when Ranveer was going to play Kapil Dev, they said, how in the hell does Ranveer look anything like Kapil Dev? But after the film came out, everybody says that we could not see Ranveer Singh. We could only see Kapil Dev on screen. And again, for Kartik, I remember a lot of eyebrows being raised and saying, Kartik, for a film like this? Like, are you sure? But for me, I've never based my casting decisions on their past films. For me, it's a interaction that happens with them. And if I start seeing my character in them, I met Katrina, and I must be honest, at that point, I've not seen too many of Katrina films. I met Katrina, and my first meeting, and I could see Zoya in her, and I knew she has what it'll take to play Zoya. And in my entire collaboration of Tiger with Salman, by the end of that film, I realized, I said, Salman, there's a certain politics that you espouse, a certain politics actually you stand for. You believe in so strongly in the whole secular fabric of this country. You believe so strongly in humanity, right? That's why your organization, but you've never articulated it on a platform of which you're a demigod. Yeah. And that's how Bajrangi came out. I said, you are the best person to stand for the politics of Bajrangi Bhaijaan. And we did it together, and of course the rest is history. Similarly with Kartik, I'd not seen too many of his. So I'd seen his films, but I'd not really followed him. But I knew when I was writing Chandu Champion, I needed somebody, one, with a lot of youth, because that, as we spoke about, that naivety, the naivety of a 17, 18-year-old boy saying, in a little village in Maharashtra, I will go to the Olympics and win a gold medal. The father is right in slapping him. He's saying, what the hell is wrong with you? But I needed that. So when I met him, I saw that boyish enthusiasm, that smile, which I used to, in fact, there was a code between him and me. So he has a different smile, which he uses in his romantic comedies and everything. And sometimes he would do that. And I remember from the monitor, I would just yell out, schoolboy Kartik, and he would immediately change that smile and become this little, schoolboy. And also, more importantly, I think just his reaction to the story. The fact that this is a boy who is famous. I think if after the mythical Samson, if there's anybody famous for his hair, it's Kartik Aaryan. And the first thing I said is, Kartik, I'm going to cut your hair. And a boy who's known for his monologues. I said, your silences will speak louder than your monologues in this film. And he just loved the story, and he said, sir, whatever it takes, I'm going to do this story. And that, for me, as a director, is half the battle won. And that's why I feel like, like Kabul Express, my first film, famously, people know what happened with us. We got death threats from the Taliban. We had to stop shooting. It was hell. There were suicide bombings. But it was John, Abraham, and Arshad Warsi who stood by me and said, listen, we're going to stay here. If you want us to stay in Afghanistan, despite all the death threats that Taliban is giving us, we're going to complete this film. That's what you need from an actor. And that's what I got from Kartik Aaryan. He said, whatever it takes, you want 15 months of training from me, you want 1.5 years of boxing training from me, you want me to learn to swim the way Olympians swim, I'll do it all. And he did it. He came down from 39% body fat to 7% body fat. Amazing. It's incredible, with no use of steroids, just the natural way to get the body that he needed to be able to portray a middleweight boxer in the 60s. So I think that kind of hard work, and I'm so happy today people are loving his performance, calling it his career best. So for me, it's great, as a filmmaker, when you have people saying, hey, listen, we think New York is John and Katrina's career best, we think Bajrangi is Salman's career best, we think 83 is Ranveer's career best, and now they're talking about, that's for me what I live for, right, as a director. And people say, what do you do? I said, actually, I don't know. Like you said, you'd love to know behind the scenes. What I do, I feel now that after Chandu Champion, also in a certain sense, I was reflecting upon, okay, why does this happen? Why people believe that it's the actors get their career best performance with me. I just spend a lot of time discussing the material with them. I spend a lot of time when I'm writing it trying to imagine how and why will they react to these situations. So when I'm interacting with them, when I'm writing it, I'm trying to make it as logical and as real a reaction for them. So what happens is on set, they're not struggling, because what happens is, honestly, however good an actor is, if you give him or her lines that they cannot identify with and don't know what context are we supposed to say this, there's no way they can pull off a great performance. The moment they're comfortable and they understand 100% why this character is saying this, the way he's saying it or the way she's saying it, they get it naturally. It comes organically. That's all I do. Otherwise, actually, if you meet any of the or talk to any of the actors I've worked with, they will tell you that I actually instruct minimally on set. In fact, on the first take, I stay away. A lot of people don't understand, especially some other actors, some newer actors. They find it very weird. Why is the director not interacting with us before the take? Because what I do is I speak with them a lot before. I do a lot of readings with them. I explain the material to them. On the day of the first take, I try and stay away, because my fear is, if I instruct them, they might not do something that they'd come prepared for. Because they might feel, especially when you become a relatively successful director, they feel, oh, this guy probably knows something we don't. So if I say something, I'm going to cut something that they've come prepared with, and I'll never see it. So I try and stay away. I say, okay, well, I'm not going to interact with you till the first take. And in the first take, sometimes what they bring is magic, which I might not even have thought of. And then I said, okay, this, what you've got, let's go with this. Let's not do it the way I'd spoken about, because what you've brought is better than my material. And that is something which is very important as a creative person. You can never become creatively arrogant and imagine that you know everything the best. There's so many times that the actors come and surprise you and say, oh my God, I never thought of it like this. I want to, in Chandu Champion in particular, mention a scene, because it's one of the most talked about scenes in the film, is when, I don't have the spoilers, but when the brother on the beach, tells him what's going to happen from here, and he breaks down. Now, Anirudh Dave, the actor, in his audition, actually did it differently from the way I had written the scene. I mean, the material is the same, but just a few little nuances here and there. And I saw that audition, and I told Mukesh Chabra, my casting director, I said, I want this boy as the brother. Please tell him to do exactly what he did in the audition in the take. Do not change it to the material that I've written. So, because I just saw something very unique in the way he put it across. I could see how his heart is breaking more than Murlikant's when he's saying what he's saying to his younger brother. So, I mean, that's, I guess, what I try and do with my actors, and I'm happy that sometimes fabulous performances come out of that exercise.
Oh, so beautifully articulated. And I think that's where the innocence, like we were mentioning, comes into play. And very, very palpable as well from that. But again, not to gender spin it, or make it completely about that. But I think it definitely does need, applaud with the way you've represented male characters, I think, in your films. There is a vulnerability attached to them. And I also would like to pinpoint this whole idea of duality, male duality in all your characters. For example, in Kabul Express, like you mentioned, Arshad and John. New York, you had Neil and John. Bajrangi Bhaijaan, you obviously had Salman and Nawaz, and then of course in Chandu Champion, there were so many different variations of that. You had it with Vijay Raj and with Kartik, and then with Shreyas also, and then also with Kartik and Rajpal Yadav. So there was a very beautiful exploration of male duality, but yet exploring vulnerabilities, almost like a yin and yang kind of a dynamic. Again, what has inspired that in your films? Do you think you've also shared this friendship in your life, which is kind of translated to you representing this on screen?
I think, for me, it always lends to great banter. And I think with that banter comes a lot of humor, which I think is so essential in breaking the tension of some scenes. For me, it actually originated from the banter between Arshad Varsi and John Abraham in Kabul Express, which actually is, in a certain sense, a true reflection of the banter between me and my friend Rajan Kapoor, who, if you see all my films, the executive producer is Rajan Kapoor. We've been together since school, actually, and then we did a documentary there. So I just felt in Kabul, well, even when we were in Kabul during the war, when we were covering it and doing our documentaries, there was always this literally the threat of death on your heads, right? Because you're in the middle of a war zone. But the banter would always diffuse the tension, like his obsession with his cigarettes and his obsession of not sharing his cigarettes in a country where everybody starts a conversation by saying, "Can I have a cigarette?" It became such a funny trope for me in Kabul Express. So that banter between these boys is something that I really enjoy. And I think that's why, these natural pairings, like even in Bajrangi, I remember when I was writing the second half screenplay, and I said, okay, he's reached Pakistan now. He needs somebody to go forward with, right? And I suddenly remembered this one video that I'd seen years ago of this journalist called Chand Nawab, struggling at the railway station to deliver something on YouTube. And I remember falling off my chair and making a mental note that someday I want to use this character in my film. And so when I was writing Bajrangi, I immediately said, hey, that character comes and joins Bajrangi, and then so that again lent itself to a lot of banter. So yeah, I think I like that dynamic. And people sometimes when they say, oh, maybe there should have been a woman, what they don't understand is actually what you're saying in most of our films is the man and woman relationship generates emotion. So what people can sometimes miss is the emotion. It's not the man-woman dynamic, but if that same emotion, for me, for example, Vijay Raj and Kartik Aaryan is the love story of the film.
Correct. Yeah.
And if that relationship gives you the emotion that normally a man-woman relationship would also give, that emotional fulfillment comes across, So when you see Vijay Raj's breakdown in the final scene is actually the trigger when most people begin to cry in the climax. It's not when they're watching Kartik win, and it's literally, and I've seen this and observed, the moment Vijay Raj gets up and sheds a tear is when people break down. Because you've seen this dynamic between the two. It's a rough dynamic, right? Especially in the first half. It's a very rough. There's no expression of gentleness or softness, and then how this person sort of pushes this guy, and finally lets go and breaks down when it's over.
Again, not to compare, but it just reminded me of Million Dollar Baby. The dynamic between the
Yeah.
the rest. It was just so beautiful, and I think it was almost like this subliminal father-son relationship.
Yes.
Almost that bond that he never quite had with his dad. It almost
with his father,
yes, and that's what I really liked about it. But two big questions. One part of it, okay, is of course your films are very pro-human, no doubt about it. But also what I love is this internal patriotism that your films have. I think every movie that you've done is very pro-India. It's for the country, and progressive films for the country as well. Now, of course, it's always wonderful whenever someone says Jai Hind or Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Of course, it swells yourself with pride. But I think the patriotism that you show is so beautiful in your film. So I would love if you could shed some light about that, especially in Chandu Champion, because I mean, it's literally, it can't get anything more than that, patriotic than that. So that, and also secondly, soon it'll be Bajrangi Bhaijaan ke 10 saal. Now, if we look back at the journey and the Kabir Khan that was there making that film then to now, what would you say has been your biggest growth? So two big questions, but I know you've got time crunch, so if you could please shed some light.
Okay. So to answer your first question, absolutely. I think for me, patriotism is a very, very strong emotion because I do consider myself to be a hugely patriotic person, and I love it that I can showcase it in my films. But again, it has to be in the layers beneath. Patriotism is not about what you say. It's not about your slogans. Patriotism is about what you do for your country without saying it. Kapil Dev did not say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. He just won the World Cup for India.
Correct.
Chandu Champion does not beat his chest and give patriotic slogans. He just went and won the first gold medal for India. That's patriotism. Patriotism is love for your country, not expressing it through the prism of hate for somebody else.
Correct. Absolutely.
Right? Yep. So that for me is a very important thing. Patriotism has to be and can only be a very, very positive emotion. There can be no negativity or toxicity attached to it. It's pure love for your motherland. and that needs to come across in what you do, what you stand for, not lip service, not by espousing dialogues and slogans. And that for me has been very important. Patriotism is all about inclusivity. It's
Yes.
all about loving your country with everything in it, loving your country with its problems, and when you see the problems, having the courage to speak up about the problems because you love your country and you don't want your country to have those problems. Patriotism is not about, oh, everything is fine, everything is fine, everything is fine. That's false.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
even if you love your mother and you see there's something happening, you can even have a argument with your mother and say, okay, no, this is not right, let's do it like this. It's because it's love for her that you're doing it,
Mm.
right? It's so it's there's that is something that I've very strongly believed in, and I'm so glad actually, because these are things which is the subtext of a film.
Yeah.
As you said, and a lot of people are calling Chandu Champion a hugely patriotic film,
Mm.
but there's not one dialogue in the film that can translate itself to being, oh, this is what you call a patriotic dialogue. Because it's not about that. It's about what the man is doing for his country, which is about patriotism. So, and I'm glad, the layers beneath are also being recognized by audiences, and they catch on to that. And then when you do that, I think the film viewing experience becomes that much more profound. I often say that a mainstream film should be made where you can enjoy it at face value. You don't need to get into the layers beneath. But if you do get into the layers and the subtext, you will find the film that much more profound.
Mm. Correct.
And your second question was about Bajrangi Bhaijaan, 10 years of probably one of my most loved films, definitely my most commercially successful film.
Might I add, the best film for me in Hindi cinema history, among the best films in Hindi cinema history.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So I would say inherently, I'm still the same person. The values that I was able to bring out in Bajrangi Bhaijaan are the values that you will see in my subsequent films like 83 and Chandu Champion also. That that uh, uh, that pride, that feeling of fulfillment, that feeling of being moved for your country, that patriotism comes through even in all these films. So as a person and what I stand for in my politics, my ideology, I'm definitely still the same. As a craftsman, I think I have progressed. I have more command over the material that I have. I feel that I can construct scenes in an easier way. I can construct scenes in a more confident way. So there's been a growth as a director, as a craft, but as a person who believes that his or her personality must reflect on screen, I'm still the same person. This is something which is very important for me, and I tell this to a lot of my juniors, because I'm from film school. I have a lot of juniors who come and speak to me or come for some advice, and I always say that please remember, especially in your first film, people who know you should say this could have been only be made by so and so or by X or Y. Because if your personality is not coming through in your film, there's no point in making a film. If you're just going to replicate something that's coming on screen, then there's no point. Anybody who sees the film has to say, oh, there's a new storyteller in town. And that's very important. That's a signature of a director, right? Versus, say, an artist who signs their name. At the end of the day, if you're able to see a film and say, oh, this is a XYZ film, this is a ABC film, that is when you are happy as a director, because you've managed to create a legacy and not just money in the bank and the box office.
Absolutely. But you know what? I remember in Bajrangi Bhaijaan, I remember the moment Munni says Jai Shri Ram to Salman Khan, I had tears in my eyes, because I think this is what equality is, right? Like, this is exactly when we talk about togetherness. This is what we're addressing here.
Absolutely.
And of course, I just also wanted to clarify, of course, saying Bharat Mata Ki Jai is always something very much treasured and loved. But like you said, it has to be action oriented. And I think that is something that I also agree with. Because I mean, I know the national anthem of India off by heart, and I am a British born citizen. So that just goes to show how much, no matter how far you are from your homeland, your motherland, you can never leave. You can leave the motherland, but the motherland will never leave you, as they say. I think your films have always reflected that very beautifully. But look, Kabir, I know you have to go, but thank you so much for joining me on filmeshilmy.com.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Such a pleasure and honor to have you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.